So, Huw Jenkins, as a bit of an introduction, first of all, great to have you with us, Hugh, today.
Thanks very much. Yeah, thank you.
For a bit of background for people who don't know the fantastic pedigree that Hugh has in football, I just thought I'd go through a bit of detail before we start into the questions. So, during his time at Swansea, he guided the club from the bottom of League Two to the Premier League, a League Cup final victory, and playing in European competition. The club moved from the Vetchfield to the purpose-built Liberty Stadium. And as well as performing the functions you'd expect as chairman, CEO, Hugh was also undertaking many of the duties that we would today attribute to the role of a sporting director, which obviously challenged with a lot of people in this room. Employed a number of world-class head coaches, including Roberto Martinez, Paulo Sousa, Brendan Rodgers, Michael Laudrup, Graham Potter. And responsible for growing the academy into a Cat 1 status, which I know is something that gives you a great deal of pride and we'll talk about. Fantastic in the transfer market, delivering a surplus of over £100 million in dealings, including the likes of Llorente, Joe Rodon, Scott Sinclair, Wilfred Boney, Ben Davies, John Joe Shelby, the list goes on. It's a real accolade to Hugh's acumen in the transfer market. In 2015, Hugh was awarded Football CEO of the Year by the Football Business Awards, and in 2015 you were also awarded the OBE for your services to sport in Wales by the Duke of Cambridge at Windsor Castle. So we've got someone with great esteem alongside me in the room today. So you became chairman of Swansea in 2002, and within that decade you're moving into the Premier League and playing at the Liberty Stadium, as we said. And you got a real kudos for the way that you went about appointing managers, and that Swansea developed a Swansea way that was really recognisable as a style of play. That's what I describe as a magical potion that most of us who've worked in football for many years can't ever seem to deliver. So what was your approach to that? Did you have a set out clear vision at the start? Where did your football knowledge come from? And did you have people working with you and advising you during those early stages?
Thanks for that introduction, Adrian. The question to start off may seem a bit unusual to start off with this part of it, but obviously when I joined Swansea and being a Swansea supporter, we had the chance to take over the club in 2001. At that time, the club was virtually on its knees financially, like a lot of clubs in League Two. And the first remit I think we had as we got into the club was to try and stabilise it and find a way to just pay our bills. We were in that position, paying water bills, paying this, paying that, and just starting from grassroots really to try and get the club going again. I was under no illusion that I had all the answers. I think we all know in football that often many people say they do, but we all know things change and attitudes change, and things are very difficult to predict in football. As much as we try to do it, it's difficult. So the starting process there was, when I got in there really, was relying on some people with experience, because obviously I was new into it, although I've got a bit of background in football and I run a semi-professional club for a few years. But getting into Swansea City was a different animal as such, and naturally with some appointments I made and some changes, you've got to rely on other people's experience. I did that, and we appointed people like Brian Flynn and Kevin Reeves, who the knowledge of football was tremendous. And they brought players into the club, and you start learning about how that works and the benefits sometimes of allowing managers to perhaps to bring a few players in that they've got some prior knowledge of, and that allows me at least a little bit of comfort to take time and assess that, and you see how things develop. And my I'd like to say that one of my biggest assets was I was always prepared to bring other people in and learn from them, because I didn't have all the answers. So that allowed us to grow as a club. Like everything, you need a bit of luck on your side, which we did have to get from League Two and move forward, and that was probably the starting point, Adrian.
So I think we need to mention Kenny Jackett, who got the team, if I'm correct, out of League Two.
Yeah.
But then the next appointment you made from there was Roberto Martinez.
Yeah, I think where we were with Brian Flynn, and as much as I said, Brian was great at the time. I think there's always, when you run a football club, there must always be a time when you look at things and you think, we need to do something different. Something needs to change if we're going to be successful, or do we tread water and stand still? So the time to bring Kenny in was a good thing. It was twofold. He was working as assistant with Ian Holloway in, I think, QPR, League One. His knowledge was greater again because he was London-based, been at Watford, been Welsh international. And I felt he would bring something different, perhaps a bit more professionalism, and all those things you need to just go a little bit further. And it proved right. With Kenny, got us promoted from League Two. We then obviously got into League One. We hit the playoffs. We got to the final and lost one of the playoff finals. And then the second year after that, you get the feeling that things are a little bit more difficult. To try and achieve the same standards was always difficult for Kenny in the second year, and if he was here today, the first year, he would admit it's difficult the second year after that. So
on that point, sorry to cut across you, Hugh, you were clearly feeling there was a change imminent. You needed to. Was there a moment? Was it the way the team were playing, the formation they were playing, and then what made you decide on Roberto?
Yeah, well, Roberto was brought in by Brian Flynn, brought a crop of players in, and a lot of those players stayed with us for many years. But Roberto was quite a leader in the dressing room that Kenny had to deal with, and he was a strong personality. Players loved him, club captain. Kenny wanted to move him out, and at that time, we agreed to do that, and Roberto was going to go and seek another club. The best 2 hours I ever spent was prior to Roberto leaving, was sitting in a bar in Swansea and spending 2 hours with him and just talking through what he felt was right and wrong with our club, football-wise, but also he was strong opinions about how the game was generally in the UK and how the Football League was, and how we could look at things differently, perhaps use a bit of his influence from Spain and all these things that certainly were a good 2 hours spent, and his enthusiasm and how he felt was felt a natural fit. So as and when I felt the time was right to change when Kenny Jackett was there. I think falling back then, and I interviewed 4 or 5 managers at that time, but Roberto was in Chester. There was a chance to bring him in. Number one, he was free. It was a good one, good way to start. And obviously I went to meet him, and we decided to go down a certain route, and he came back and joined us. So that was the start of bringing Roberto in. I always changed managers. I had done, always. There was about 8 games to go each season, same I'd done previously with Brian Flynn, with Kenny. That 8 games to go gives somebody a chance to come into the club, gives them the pre-season, which is vital to get things right, to start the new season with momentum. Otherwise, that's going to be a big struggle if its timing is not right. So I did the same with Roberto. He came in with 8 games to go. Kenny finished, and then he was obviously prepared and cleared his thoughts and built up some momentum ready for the following season, which was our promotion winning season from League One into the Championship.
Just on that process, obviously a lot of people never actually experience recruiting a manager directly. You've been through this process many times. What's the weighting that you put on it with regards to technical proficiency, to personal relationship and qualities as the owner of a club?
Naturally, as I touched on, each manager it's not just managers, the timing felt right for what I required, what I needed at the club at that time. And you were trying to make that work, knowing, and again, building up experience, knowing the squad of player we had and squad of players, and making sure that naturally the fit was right, and that was, you know, the key to doing that. And number one, they gotta work well with me. You know, it's whether it's me as chairman, whether it's sporting director. I was lucky because one, through the financial side, we had no staff. It was me doing the work. Good background to have, but the fact that I had to do all the different roles, meet everybody, employ everybody, for staff, managers, players. You know, I grew up doing that over a 10 or 12 year period and done every role in the club myself. And that's what we did, and then we expanded, and naturally we expanded and brought good people in, and those good people helped us to grow.
So you had a really successful period with Roberto, and he developed this style of football that became that one that we would all enjoy watching and readily identify as Swansea. When he moved on, you appointed Paulo Sousa for a short period before he went on to, came from QPR, then went to Leicester, correct?
Yeah.
But then the next one in was Brendan Rodgers, who everyone in the room will know very well. Brendan, from memory, hadn't had a great period with Reading and Watford, although he'd done well at Chelsea in the development stages. What made you go for Brendan? I think that's a really important point for people to understand.
One of the key things, obviously, as we went along, no matter what league we were in, our budget was virtually the lowest of whether we was League 2, League 1, Championship. It was always the same. We were in the bottom 3 financially. Again, you look for managers, they cost you nothing. And that's number one. They're out to work, they're there, available, and you look for somebody who could fit well. But going back to Roberto, obviously we developed a style of play which was different. We had to be different because financially we couldn't compete with the likes in League 1. We had the likes of Forest and Leeds competing for promotion. We adopted a different style, which is roughly straightforward, 4-3-3, playing with 3 midfield players. The majority of teams we played at that level never did that. They were standard British game, 4-4-2, stuck at it, and it made our transition to do that very simple, because it just allowed us to follow that plan really of what we had, and the players we brought in and identified would suit that system, and we quietly moved forward with that in mind. Back to your question, Brendan. Obviously it's Roberto finishing was a big thing for us. He had a big link into our fans, and the fans were probably devastated that like always, somebody wants to leave the club they love. So it was that, trying to find the solution to that is never easy. I met different managers and thought about different things, and all of a sudden Brendan's out of the blue. I'm not going to say I went and found him anywhere. It was out of the blue. He sent in a dossier of how his style was and how his thoughts were on football. Based a lot on what he'd gone around and learned in, I think Barcelona was one of his main features in that, and how they played and how they set up, and Brendan was very focused on that, and looking at what we had done previously, and how we were as a club, and most importantly how the group of players were, and how they saw things. You were looking for somebody, one, who would adopt the same style and stick to it. Two, he had to come in and work on his own without the modern structure of 10 people turning up and dismantling the club. So we had to stop that. And Brendan, to be fair to him, came and worked on his own. And style of play, but number one, you obviously all know Brendan. His personality is fantastic, and his link to the players and the way he talks to them, and probably his enthusiasm was a big key factor in taking us forward as a club.
So during that period, Dave Ledbetter was with you as well as head of recruitment.
Yeah.
So with yourself and Dave, what was the approach to scouting and identifying talent? Because you said you didn't have a great deal of money, so you're having to find gems or develop players.
Yeah.
What was the approach to that? Did you have a large scouting team?
No. And on that subject, which is a great point, you know, as we progressed with different managers and through the leagues as a club, we had to find good people to work with us. And I met Dave Ledbetter in the Celtic Manor in Newport, and we sat talking, which previously I'd sat there with Brendan, and we were there talking and spent hours talking about how we felt about football and how we saw things, and obviously that was one of the key decisions, to bring somebody in who was experienced and knew how to identify talent well. And I think those things are, again, massive in our way forward. We didn't have a big team at that time.
Did you see that as a weakness or an advantage?
I didn't think about it because we had no money, so we couldn't do a lot to change it. But now, obviously, as having experienced everything, it's certainly an advantage to have less numbers, the less opinions. In my view, the better. We simplified everything. Every player we wanted to sign, we just picked the phone up and signed him. There's no discussions, no meetings. We did it. Yes, some may not work, but the majority did. And they were brought into our club, and within reason, lots for so long, and we made good money out of it. Things change, you know. We know how things work today, and everybody got a different approach. Our approach doesn't satisfy everybody. I'm not right what I say. I did what worked for us, and we continued that. We were lucky. We always got that little bit of luck that it worked well for us. And
when you were actually selecting players, did you have a particular player profile that you had per position that you looked for that would have real tight variables, or because you had a small team in yourself and Dave, and I'm guessing the manager, you could have a level of flexibility? How did that work? Because you're taking players from different countries, weren't you? You weren't just, I mean, this was the beauty of what you were doing.
Players from South America, obviously Spain. We had players from all over, really, and we developed a huge list of good contacts. A couple of years today, Marcelino from Spain. It's people we work with. Number one, they're good people, and that's the key to what we achieved, was good people working together and making sure that you had loyalty and trust, and that's what we had. We built up that network. We still simplified everything. There was no big discussions and big ideas. We done things and done them our way, and signed players, and you know, we felt they suited our style. Naturally, we played with a certain system. Two centre halves were two centre halves, two full backs were full backs, and I know it's changed today. People got different ideas and talk about different things, but we simplified it.
If you were in situ now, obviously there's a much greater influence now of data and available than ever before, and it's fantastic. Would you be open to that in combination with traditional scouting as well? What would your approach be to that? Because I'm guessing back when you're talking about, you were going very much through more traditional scouting methods.
Yeah, we always had to go and see a player. You know, you've got to go and see a player in the UK on a. We used to laugh about it, just a wet Tuesday night, and it's got to be an away game, and it's pointless watching them in some home games where the teams are dominating possession, waste of time. And then you've got to go to away games to see the tough games and see how players react, which Dave Ledbetter would go and do that, and you build up a picture of a player that way. In some cases, when you talk about stats, we signed players because we had no money. We would sign players who perhaps had gone down the charts on stats. They may have played well 2 years ago, and we were trying to find out why they had changed. Managers may have changed, systems may have changed. So we then were looking at the basement level of finding somebody who would cost us next to nothing. Or maybe when we were in the Premier League, maybe $1 million here and there. And that's the challenge we had, and that's the one we thrived and enjoyed doing.
So while you were going through the leagues, particularly Championship in the Premier League, you're competing in League One and in the Championship against clubs that are much bigger in history, resources, financially, supporter base than what Swansea were. Yeah. Yet you outperformed them, both in the way you played and in results as well. Why do you think so many clubs, and including now, so many clubs can't get it right? Why do they fail?
Yeah. If I had that answer, it'd be fantastic. But it's the only thing I can concentrate on is what we did. We had, although I was part owner and shareholder as well, we only operated the club from day one, and even when I left in the Premier League, we had no backer putting money in. We never operated with an overdraft from start to finish. There was no shareholders lost any money. There was no money put in. We even, at one stage in the Premier League, we took out dividends, which every year we took out £1 million and split that between the shareholders, which included our supporters' trust. That's the type of thing we did as a club, right? So you had no fallback to safeguard. If we went over our bank limit and into an overdraft, you just couldn't do it. So it was you had to make sure the books balanced. Whether we bought or sold players, it had a balance. And we operated that system. And that's the system we had. There's no good looking over our shoulder and thinking we wanted something different. That's what we had, that's what we dealt with. We grew up that way. The question Adrian asked, we looked upon, and I'm not saying this is right, but I'm going to tell you as it was, we looked upon the other clubs who had more money as the fact that they would squander more money, that they would probably waste more money on transfers, they would make the wrong decisions because they got money, they would overplay players, and players would go there for the wrong reason because they knew they were going to get double salary at different clubs. So we took advantage of that. That was something that we were happy to happen, and we knew that, or we felt that we would operate, and the way we operated differently would be to our benefit, and the ones who got all the money and happy to waste 20 million a season in the championship would be their downfall. And I'm not going to do it, but you could list owners now and clubs now in the championship that seem very happy to continually lose 20 million a season, and the owners lost 200 million over so many years, and they're still in the championship without a player that can be sold anywhere. Complete waste of time. But they do it continually in our game, and it's a sad reflection, in my view, how it's run.
It's a brilliant answer, that, Hugh. Getting back to the manager role in it, you said the managers obviously were involved, and clearly that's one of the ways that clubs either work really well or don't work well when there's sometimes friction. If you've got yourself, the manager, and Dave, as I would see it back then, what was the role of the manager in that recruitment process?
I think as I touched on, I think all managers initially have got a good idea on one or two players, and as an example, Brian Flynn brought a few good players in, which come right through the club with us, with Alan Tate and Liam Britton, which just two examples there, and Roberto. And then you got Kenny Jackett brought Gary Monkin, who was captain of our club for years. Then you look at Roberto brought players in, and they stayed with us, and then Brendan, we had Scott Sinclair without Scott being signed from Chelsea at the time. I don't think we would have, the promotion we had into the Premier League was obviously part of that. I think he scored 22 goals that year. So, and then you look at Michael Laudrup brought 3 or 4 great signings in, which were cheap signings for Premier League. We had Michu, and Jonathan de Guzman was virtually a free transfer, and Chico Flores, centre half, we bought from Italy for 2 million, played regularly. Pablo Hernandez, which went on and done well at Leeds as well recently. We don't think we spent 6 million doing all of them. So, we relied on Michael's knowledge, which was why Michael came in, and I'd like to say that's why we appointed him, because he had that, he took us further without, with a...
Hugh, just on that point, on Michael, sorry to interrupt you, Michael had obviously been around the game for a long time, managing in Spain, huge name in European football for what he achieved as a player. A lot of clubs will have had a chance to take a chance on Michael. You've mentioned the recruitment side there, but that can't have been the first instance that you went to him. Why Michael Laudrup?
I think when he was introduced to us, Marcelino introduced him to us. Two, he obviously managed Getafe in Spain, which we felt that a smaller club competing against so-called bigger clubs, done a good job. I think that was in his nature, Michael. He's a person, again, a lovely person, that his knowledge of football is tremendous. And it took us further because our knowledge with Brendan was mostly UK based, I suppose, and then you had Brendan moving to Liverpool, provided us with another problem, and you had to find something to try and keep going and find something to get motivation again. And Michael did that with his signings and everything that he brought in. I think we went away and beat QPR 5-0 in the opening game of the season, and everybody's up and running. Mitchell scores 2 goals and the season's transformed. And and he took us into Europe and finished high in the table and all those things. But it's the fact that he had more knowledge. I know my limitations. I'm learning and growing all the time, but you had to bring somebody else in with more knowledge, and he had more knowledge. He liked the way we played. We met him and talked, and his view of Swansea was we played football like a big team, in reference to how Man City play or Tottenham play. And Swansea played like that for a number of years, and that attracted Michael to us. I think what put a lot of people off, no doubt, is Michael's agent, I imagine. I'll touch on his agent, but I got on well with him. And I spent many trips out to Barcelona with him, and we had many arguments, but we got on well. And that could have been the point that probably put a lot of people off taking Michael.
So, you negotiated a lot of transfers over the years. And I'm sure for many people in this room, it's one of the most difficult elements, whether you're trading in or trading out. Yeah. Who is the toughest negotiator that you had to deal with, and why?
Yeah, I'd say, which has been said many times, Daniel Levy is probably the most difficult, because he's probably very much like me, and bought a lot of players off Tottenham because we felt Tottenham suited us. Tom Carroll, Kyle Norton joined us. Took me about 3 transfer windows to do those deals. He would want X amount and I'd be offering half, and he wouldn't answer the phone and I wouldn't answer my phone, and those things went on and on and on. And that's how we did. The hardest one was we had a 3-player exchange at one point. We were taking Gylfi Sigurdsson at the time from Spurs, and they wanted Ben Davis, who's still there now. Ben Davis went in there, a young boy from our academy, went to Tottenham. And we had Michel Vorm, a goalkeeper. And it turned out to be quite a difficult thing. It took 2 weeks to do this in the summer, because I needed Michel Vorm to go as part of the transfer, because we had Lucas Fabianski already lined up on a free transfer from Arsenal to come in. And there's no way, I know what Michel Vorm was like, there's no way it would work well if Michel was still there as number 2. So he had to go to suit us, but in the Tottenham move, he was getting good money, good contract, but then Daniel was starting to not see eye to eye that he wanted to do the 3-player deal, so it took 2 weeks to try and persuade him. I pulled the deal a few times, unless he took him, and eventually we got that deal done. And that was most of my summers. I'd done everything in the summer to help our coaches to restructure the squads, to move players out, to make sure the numbers weren't great. That's another thing that made their jobs harder, and that's, the deals with Daniel were always the hardest.
Do you think he had a respect for you because you negotiated hard with him?
I hope he did, but I'm not sure.
No. What was your attitude to transfer deadline day? Did you try and avoid that if you could?
Yeah, I think we all know that. We in the latter. I'll give you an example. The latter years have been at Swansea. We sold Gylfi, which is well publicised. I would have sold him probably for a lot less than we sold him for, because timing is important. Unless we'd done Gylfi's deal early in a window, we never would have replaced him with the right players. It was delayed and delayed and delayed, because we'd sold the club, we now had different owners, and they thought they could extract more by waiting and waiting and waiting. And in the end, when we get the money, we get the deal, we gain 5 million. and then we go and waste 20 doing something else because you renew last 2 days. Nothing is lined up. One, you're going to pay more. Two, you're not going to get who you want because you should have been done a lot earlier. And we end up with problems, and to me that started part of our decline. We got relegated. But timing is essential, and getting the deals done so we got adequate time, especially in the summer, to make sure things are done correctly.
Thanks. So you touched on there, the US consortium came in and you left the club, I think it was early 2016.
Yeah.
So you've been kind of out for a while now, but I know you...
Yeah, 2019 I left.
Sorry, 2019. You're back watching football again, from our brief conversations.
Yeah.
Have you got an appetite to get back involved again?
Yeah, it took me a while. You know, what I spent 20 years of my life at Swansea and it does take over your life. Anybody in football will tell you that. There's no escaping it. And because I took on all the different roles, and especially there was no summer break for me. The manager, Michael, was out in America enjoying himself, having a holiday, and I'm still there doing the transfers and making sure the squad is right for him when he gets back. Those things went on. I never had a break during those 20 years, really, because the club was financially difficult to manage with all those things going on. When I finished, obviously, I had an emotional attachment to the club, and the way it went afterwards, I felt that I needed a little bit of time to perhaps recover and get my thoughts and reflect on what I did well and what I didn't do well, and like everybody does. And before I get too old, I'd like to get back in and do some work in football. I feel I can contribute something to somebody, and I'd like to have the opportunity to do that.
So with the vast experience and the breadth of experience that you've got, what's your ideal role?
I'll do anything.
Within reason.
Yeah, within reason. There's no. I don't think there's any ideal role. I think I would look at anything on its merit, but I think it needs to be a challenge. I think my best part of my job was in the early years and progressing the team, picking a team that probably defies the odds, really, rather than the other way around, and looking for a challenge that still has that, really, that you know when you wake up in the morning you've got to go out and prove somebody wrong all the time. And I think that's the big thing. I'm lucky. I can wait and make those choices, but those clubs that got that, I think, is a great challenge to be involved in.
Well, I certainly look forward to seeing what the next chapter is for you in that regard, and watch it with bated breath. Before I hand over to Ryan for some questions from the audience, can't leave you on this without asking about the World Cup. We've got kicking off on Monday, both England and Wales, and then playing each other in the same group.
Third game,
How do you see the tournament for Wales and England? And who will win the big one between the two?
Yeah, well, I don't know that answer, but I think Wales, look at Wales first. They've done well over the last few years. A lot of good young players come in, and it certainly changed the outlook of Welsh football, really. The good thing is, as a Welsh team, I think they do well as underdogs. Again, they relish that challenge, which is great in a tournament event. Probably less pressure on them. They play a good brand of football. But number one, they relish being an underdog in the game, like I just touched on earlier, proving people wrong. And I think that'll stand them in a good position. When you look at England, I think the coach, whatever, in the press, nobody seems to be quite comfortable with what squad he picks, which is always difficult when he approaches a tournament. You would say some of the players are not probably performing to their best, especially in vital positions. But then you've got world talented players and match winners, midfield and forwards that can change the game. So I think whoever approaches, I think, the World Cup with the right attitude, positive attitude, that they're going to go out there and win, will probably have a good tournament. And
do you have a favourite for the tournament itself? Other than England or Wales?
No, I don't. I'm open-minded, really. My love is football in general. Although I was a Swansea supporter, my biggest passion is football in general, and the same with the World Cup. Whoever plays well and plays a good system and you enjoy watching every day, I'd be happy for them to win. You know?
Good answer. Very, very rounded, Hugh. Thanks very much.